There are stories we hear in passing tales of family, of love, of regret, that stay with us long after the words fade. And then there are stories that reach into the very core of who we are. Stories that make us question the choices we've made, the people we've taken for granted, and the things left unsaid. This is one of those stories. It begins with a man named Daniel, a son who believed he knew everything about his father. Like many of us, Daniel carried both affection and frustration toward the man who raised him. His father, Edward, was quiet, reserved, and at times painfully distant. He worked long hours, spoke few words, and seemed to keep his emotions hidden away. Daniel often wished for more laughter, more warmth, more open love. But life, as it often does, moved forward without granting him those answers. It wasn't until Edward's death that Daniel stumbled upon something that would change everything he thought he knew about his father. A small, weathered wooden box tucked away at the back of a closet. It was old, fragile, and locked. Inside, Daniel believed, lay secrets, perhaps painful ones, perhaps healing ones. Secrets that could finally explain the silence of his father's heart. What Daniel discovered inside that box was more than just a glimpse into the past. It was a journey into sacrifice, forgiveness, and love, unspoken but deeply felt. It was a story of a man who gave everything but never found the words to say it aloud. And for Daniel, opening that box was not just about uncovering the truth. It was about reclaiming a bond he thought he had lost forever. This is the story of Edward and Daniel, a story of silence, discovery, and the quiet power of love that endures even after death. Daniel sat in the dimly lit living room, the silence pressing down heavier than the walls themselves. The funeral had ended just hours earlier, yet the scent of flowers still clung to his jacket, mixed with the faint trace of incense and candle wax. Edward was gone. The man who had been more shadow than light in his life was now nothing more than framed photographs and unfinished conversations. As relatives drifted away and neighbors gave their final condolences, Daniel found himself alone in his father's house. It felt strange and familiar, even though he had spent his childhood within these walls. Everything carried Edward's quiet discipline. Books neatly aligned on shelves, tools carefully hung in the garage, the old clock ticking steadily on the mantelpiece. Yet beneath the order, there was something haunting and emptiness that seemed to whisper that Edward had lived with secrets Daniel had never been invited to share. Daniel wandered through the house slowly, as though each step might uncover a clue about the man he had lost. In his father's bedroom, the air was thick with dust and memories. The closet, tucked away in the far corner, creaked when Daniel opened it. Jackets still carried his father's scent-faint tobacco, oil, and wood. And there, pushed to the very back, almost hidden under old boxes of papers, he saw it. A small wooden box. It was unlike anything else in the room. The wood was worn smooth by time, edges chipped, but the lock was still firm, as if guarding something precious. Daniel lifted it out carefully, feeling the unexpected weight in his hands. His heart quickened. Why had his father kept this hidden? Sat on the edge of the bed, running his fingers across the surface. Memories of his father's silence flashed before him, the times Edward had brushed off questions with a curt nod. The moments he had sat across from Daniel at the dinner table, eating quietly while the air grew thick with unspoken words. Perhaps the answers were here. Perhaps the box would reveal the side of Edward he had never been allowed to see. But the lock refused to budge. Daniel searched through drawers, cabinets, even under the bed, hoping for a key. Nothing. Frustration swelled inside him. For years he had begged for connection, for understanding. Now, even in death, his father remained silent, guarding his truth behind a lock of cold metal. Daniel carried the box into the living room and set it on the table. The tick of the mantel clock grew louder, echoing his impatience. Finally, after hours of searching, he gave up for the night. Exhaustion pulled him into uneasy sleep on the couch, the wooden box sitting only inches away, like a puzzle refusing to be solved. That night, He dreamed of his father standing in the yard, hands tucked into his pockets, watching Daniel play. As a child, no words, just that quiet gaze. When Daniel woke, the dream lingered, sharp and unsettling. The box remained on the table, waiting. In the days that followed, Daniel couldn't stay away. He carried the box home, setting it on his desk as though its presence might summon courage or clarity. He searched online for locksmiths, debated whether he should force it open, but something inside him resisted. This wasn't just any box. It was a piece of his father's life, deliberately sealed. Breaking, it felt like breaking trust. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. What could Edward have hidden for so long? Was it money? Letters? Documents? Or something darker? Something that explained the emotional distance Daniel had lived with all his life. Each night, Daniel sat before the box, staring, listening to the silence of the room. And each night, the questions grew heavier. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he opened that box, his understanding of his father and himself would change forever. 3 days passed before Daniel finally made the decision. The box had become more than just an object. It was a weight pressing against his thoughts, refusing to let him move forward. He found himself skipping meals, ignoring calls from friends, and waking in the middle of the night just to stare at it. As though the wood itself might whisper answers if he waited long enough. On the 4th morning, with rain pattering softly against the windows, Daniel picked up the phone and called a local locksmith. An older man arrived within the hour, his hands rough from decades of work, studied the box carefully. "This is old," the locksmith murmured, running his fingers along the lock. Not just a simple lock either. Whoever wanted this shut meant for it to stay that way. Daniel hesitated, his heart pounding. "Can you open it?" The locksmith nodded slowly. "I can, but once it's open, you can't go back." Those words struck Daniel harder than expected. He thought of his father's silence, of the distance that had marked their relationship. Was he ready to uncover whatever Edward had chosen to hide? After a moment, Daniel gave a firm nod. Minutes later, with a quiet click, the lock gave way. Daniel dismissed the locksmith with hurried thanks, then sat alone, staring at the box as though it might explode. Finally, with trembling hands, he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, were bundles of letters tied neatly with string. Beneath them lay photographs, black and white images of people Daniel didn't recognize, along with a small notebook, whose leather cover was worn thin. Daniel reached for the letters first. The handwriting was unmistakably his father's, though uneven, as if written late at night under strain. He untied the first bundle and unfolded a letter dated 1978. Long before Daniel was born, "Dear Anna," it began. Daniel froze. Anna, he didn't know anyone by that name. The letter continued in Edward's careful script, filled with tenderness Daniel had never once heard from his father's lips. Words of love, words of longing. Confessions of regret for not being able to give more. Daniel's chest tightened. His father had loved someone deeply, so deeply. It spilled into pages of unsent letters. But who was she? And why had Edward hidden them away? He read for hours, letter after letter, each one a window into a part of his father he had never imagined. Edward had written of a young woman he had met before marrying Daniel's mother. Their time together had been brief but profound. Interrupted by circumstances Edward never explained fully in the letters. All Daniel knew was that Anna had left, and Edward had carried that absence like a shadow for the rest of his life. Beneath the letters, the photographs offered more pieces of the puzzle. Edward younger, smiling in a way Daniel had never seen, standing beside a woman whose face radiated warmth. Anna. Daniel knew it instantly. The small notebook at the bottom of the box was different. It wasn't filled with love letters, it was a record. Dates, expenses, notes written in shorthand. And scattered throughout were references to Daniel himself, school tuition payments, Doctor visits, descriptions of birthdays and milestones. Edward had tracked everything down to the smallest detail. It was then that Daniel understood. His father had been watching, caring, providing in silence. He may not have spoken the words Daniel longed to hear, but he had lived them quietly, sacrificing to ensure his son's future. By the time Daniel closed the box, his eyes burned with tears. He had spent years resenting Edward for his distance, never realizing that love can exist without constant words or grand gestures. Love can be quiet, hidden, stored away in wooden boxes and unsent letters. But questions remained. Who was Anna? Truly, did his mother know? And why had Edward chosen to carry this secret to his grave rather than share it with his family? For the first time in days, Daniel felt not just grief, but purpose. He knew he couldn't stop here. The box had opened. The door, but it was up to him to walk through it. Somewhere out there, answers were waiting and Daniel was ready to find them. Asterisk, asterisk. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of restless curiosity. Daniel could not go about his normal life anymore, with the letters whispering from the box each time he passed his desk. He reread them obsessively, studying every word as though they were coded messages. In many ways they were, for hidden between the lines of Edward's longing were fragments of detail. A cafe on Worth Street. A spring evening in 1977, the name of a small town by the coast. Daniel wrote them all down, constructing a timeline of a life his father had never spoken about. It felt surreal. All his life, Edward had seemed like a man carved from stone, solid, dependable, but emotionless. Now, through the ink of old letters, Daniel saw him differently. Vulnerable, passionate, capable of love that pulsed with intensity. But one question grew heavier than the rest. Who was Anna now? Was she alive? Did she know Edward had kept her memory preserved in secret? Daniel began with the photographs, scanned them carefully, enlarging the faces on his computer. In one, Anna stood outside a bookstore, her hand tucked into Edward's. The store's name was visible in the background. Faded, but still legible. A quick online search revealed that the bookstore had closed down decades ago. But articles placed it in a small coastal town 2 hours from where Daniel lived. On a rainy Saturday morning, Daniel got into his car and drove. The highway stretched before him like a ribbon of unanswered questions. His father had taken this same road once, perhaps many times, yet had never spoken of it. When Daniel arrived, the town felt frozen in time. Narrow streets lined with brick buildings, a harbor dotted with fishing boats, locals moving at an unhurried pace. He wandered through, clutching a photograph of Anna, as though it might summon someone who recognized her at the local library. Daniel approached the reference desk, feeling both foolish and desperate. He showed the librarian the photo. "I'm looking for someone. Her name was Anna. This picture was taken here maybe in the late 70s. The librarian adjusted her glasses, peering closely. Her eyes widened slightly. "Yes, I think I know who. That's Anna Whitmore. She used to live here, worked at the bookstore. Lovely young woman." But the librarian's voice softened. "She moved away after her husband died. I'm not sure where." Husband, the word struck Daniel like a stone. Edward's letters had never mentioned a husband. Could it be that Anna had left his father for someone else? "Do you know if she had family?" Daniel asked quickly. The librarian nodded. "A sister still lives on Maple Street. Quiet woman, keeps to herself. Few might know more." Heart pounding, Daniel followed the directions to a small weathered house at the edge of town. He knocked, uncertain what he would say, uncertain why he was even there. The door opened to reveal an older woman with sharp eyes that softened as they fell on the photograph in his hands. "You're here about Anna, aren't you?" she said quietly. Before Daniel could speak, he nodded. "My name is Daniel. My father was Edward Hale." For a long moment, the woman studied him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. She led Daniel to a modest living room where a few framed photographs rested on the mantel. In one, Daniel saw Hertha, same woman from his father's letters. Oder, now smiling gently beside her sister, the woman introduced herself as Margaret. "My sister Anna passed away 10 years ago," she said softly. The words hit Daniel like a blow. His father's great love, the woman who had lived in his heart all these years, was gone. Margaret continued. She spoke of Edward often. "More than you might think." She said he was the one who taught her what it meant to be truly seen. But life was complicated. She met her husband after leaving town, and though she cared for him, I don't think she ever stopped loving your father. I think that's why she never came back here. It's too many memories. Daniel swallowed hard, emotions tangling inside him. I never mentioned her, not once. But he kept everything letters, photographs. He never let go. Margaret's eyes softened. Neither did she. Silence stretched between them, heavy with what could never be changed. Daniel realized then that both Edward and Anna had lived their lives carrying the same quiet ache. Separated by choices and circumstances that had left them worlds apart, as Daniel left the house that evening. The sun setting over the harbor, he felt both sorrow and strange relief. He had found her, or at least the memory of her. And in doing so, he had uncovered a truth about his father. Edward hadn't been cold or unfeeling. He had simply carried a wound so deep it had silenced him. But Daniel's journey wasn't over. There was still one person left who needed to know the truth, his mother. And he wasn't sure if revealing it would bring healing or pain. Asterisk, the drive back home was heavier than the drive out. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his mind replaying Margaret's words again and again. She never stopped loving your father. And yet, she had moved on, built another life. While Edward had remained silent, carrying his devotion like a hidden scar. Daniel thought about his mother. For as long as he could remember, she had been the anchor of their family, steady, practical, endlessly patient with Edward's quietness. She had never complained, at least not in front of Daniel. But had she known? Had she lived all those years beside a man whose heart partly belonged to someone else? By the time Daniel pulled into his parents' driveway, night had fallen. The house looked different, no longer just the place of his childhood, but the stage where untold stories had quietly unfolded. He carried the wooden box inside, its contents still neatly arranged, and sat at the kitchen table waiting. When his mother entered the room, her eyes were tired but kind. She had aged gracefully, lines of wisdom etching her face. She gave Daniel a small smile. "You've been gone all day. Out for some air." Daniel hesitated, then slid the box toward her. "Mom, I found this." In Dad's closet, her expression shifted instantly. She froze, staring at the box as though it were a ghost. Slowly, she opened it, her hands trembling slightly as she touched the faded letters. For a long moment, she said, "Nothing, Mom," Daniel whispered. "Who was Anna?" Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. She sat down heavily, clutching one of the photographs. "So, you know," she said quietly. Daniel's chest tightened. "You knew." She nodded. "I always knew." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside. She unfolded the story carefully, piece by piece, like stitching open an old wound. Edward had met Anna before he ever married. They had fallen in love quickly, fiercely, but circumstances had torn them apart. Anna's family moved away, and Edward, heartbroken, stayed behind. "By the time I met your father," she said, "he was already a man carrying shadows. I knew there had been someone before me." He didn't speak her name, but he didn't have to. You can tell when someone carries a ghost. Daniel's heart ached. "Why did you stay with him?" She looked at him with a mix of sadness and resolve. "'Cause love isn't always about being someone's first. It's about choosing to stay, even when the past lingers. Your father may have loved Anna once, but he chose me. He chose us. He built a life with me, raised a son with me, worked every day to provide for us. Was it perfect? No. Did he speak as much as I wanted? No. But he was there, and sometimes that's enough. Daniel's throat tightened. He had spent so long resenting Edward's distance, not realizing his mother had lived with it too, but had chosen to see his presence as proof of love. She touched the letters gently. These were his burden to carry. I never asked him to forget her because I knew he couldn't, but I also knew that he loved us in his own way. Quiet, steady, unshakable. And now you see both sides of him. Tears blurred Daniel's vision. For the first time, he saw his parents not as perfect figures, but as two flawed, complex human beings who had made choices, compromises, sacrifices. His father had loved Anna. Yes, but he had also chosen family, chosen duty, chosen Daniel. Mother, in turn, had chosen forgiveness. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was understanding. Finally, his mother spoke again. You know, Daniel, your father never said much, but near the end, he told me one thing. He said he hoped you would one day understand him. Maybe this box, maybe it was his way of making sure you did. Daniel's chest heaved with quiet sobs he had been holding back for years. He reached across the table, taking his mother's hand. I think I finally do. That night, Daniel returned to his room with the box. He reread the letters, not with bitterness, but with empathy. He saw his father not as a distant figure, but as a man flawed, broken, yet capable of love in more ways than Daniel had ever realized. And as he closed the lid, Daniel understood that the box had never been meant to tear his family apart. It had been meant to heal, to show him that love takes many forms. Some spoken, some silent, but all real. Still, one thought lingered in Daniel's mind. What would he do with this truth now? Should he keep the box as a private reminder, or share its story so that others might understand the hidden ways love endures? The answer, he realized, would shape the rest of his life. In the weeks that followed, the wooden box remained on Daniel's nightstand, a quiet companion that seemed to pulse with unseen life. At first, he would open it every evening, rereading the letters and touching the photographs, as though repetition might unlock even deeper truths. But slowly, the words began to settle within him. They no longer demanded urgency. Instead, they offered comfort, like echoes finally finding rest. Daniel noticed a change in himself. Where once he had spoken of his father with resentment, now he found himself defending him in conversations with friends. He wasn't cold, Daniel would say softly. He just loved differently. For the first time, those words didn't feel like excuses. They felt like understanding. Yet a question still tugged at him. What should he do with the box? To keep it hidden would be to repeat his father's silence. To share it meant exposing private memories, both tender and painful. He wrestled with this decision late into the night, sitting with his mother at the kitchen table, her conversation stretching into the early hours. Your father wanted you to find it, she reminded him one evening. Maybe that means he wanted you to carry it forward, not to bury it again. But how? Daniel asked, do I just show the world his letters to another woman? Do I let people see that side of him? His mother's smile was tired, but warm. You don't have to share every word. What matters is the truth you found in them, that love takes many shapes, and that silence doesn't mean absence. That's what people need to hear. Her words stayed with him a week later. Daniel found himself driving to the coast again, back to the harbor where he had first learned of Anna's fate. He carried the box with him, unsure what he intended to do, until he was standing on the edge of the pier, the sea wind pulling at his hair. He opened the box, lifting one of the letters. Dear Anna, it began. Daniel read the words aloud, his voice trembling against the sound of waves. For the first time, he wasn't reading as Edward's son, but as someone who finally understood Edward as a man-flawed human, aching, but still devoted in his own way. When he finished, Daniel carefully tied the letters back together and placed them inside. He didn't throw them into the sea. He couldn't. Instead, he whispered, "I'll carry it for you, Dad. I'll make sure your love both, for her and for us, won't be forgotten." The journey back from the pier was different this time. Daniel no longer felt haunted by questions. Instead, he felt entrusted. As though his father had passed him a torch he hadn't known he was meant to carry. In the days that followed, Daniel began writing. At first, it was only for himself. Journal. Entries about his father. About the silence in their home. About the discovery of Anna. But slowly, the writing became something large, a story. Not a confession, but a testament. Story about love that hides in plain sight. About fathers who show devotion, not with words, but with sacrifice. And about sons who come to see that silence differently once it's gone. He shared the draft with his mother one evening. She read it slowly, tears streaming down her face. "This," she said, pressing the pages back into his hands, "is the gift your father left you. Not just the box, but the lesson. And now it's yours to give to others." Daniel knew then what he would do. He would keep the wooden box, not as a secret buried in dust, but as a symbol of everything he had learned. And through his words he would ensure that Edward's story, his quiet, imperfect love, would live on. For the first time since his father's passing, Daniel didn't feel only grief. He felt gratitude. The silence had spoken at last, and he had finally heard it. Months passed and life slowly found its rhythm again. Yet for Daniel, nothing felt the same. He had returned to his job, reconnected with friends, even attended family gatherings. Outwardly, it seemed as though he had moved on. But inside, he carried a quiet flame that had not been there before, the flame his father had unknowingly passed to him. The wooden box remained on his desk, but it was no longer a burden. It was a companion. Each time he glanced at it, he didn't think of unanswered questions anymore. He thought of love, messy, complicated, imperfect love. He thought of sacrifice. And he thought of a man who had struggled to show his heart, but had loved nonetheless. One evening, Daniel decided to visit his father's grave. The cemetery was calm, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. He carried the box with him, resting it gently against the headstone. For a long while, he said nothing. Then he spoke softly, words tumbling out like water finally breaking through a dam. "Dad, I used to think you didn't care, that you were just a man made of silence. But now I know. You loved. You loved deeply, maybe too deeply. And I was too blind to see it. I'm sorry for resenting you all those years. See you now. I'll make sure the world sees you too." His voice broke, but he felt lighter. The weight he had carried since childhood's ache of never hearing his father say the words he longed for had finally been lifted. The letters, the photographs, quiet records of sacrifice, they had spoken louder than words ever could as he stood there. The wind rustling the trees, Daniel realized something profound. Love does not always arrive in the form we expect. Some fathers laugh loudly, hug tightly, and speak openly. Show love through long hours at work, by fixing what's broken, by silently paying bills and keeping track of birthdays in a worn notebook. Edward had been the latter. And while it had taken Daniel years to understand, he finally did. Weeks later, Daniel finished the story he had been writing. He didn't name Anna, nor did he expose every detail. Instead, he wove a narrative about a man who loved in silence, about the unseen sacrifices of fathers, and about a son who only learned the truth too late. When he shared it with a local publication, he didn't expect much. But the response surprised him. Letters poured in from readers who had seen their own fathers in Edward. People thanked him for reminding them that love can be quiet, that sometimes the greatest devotion hides in the smallest gestures. Daniel read every letter, his chest swelling with a mix of sorrow and pride. His father's story, once locked away in a wooden box, was now touching lives beyond his family. Edward's silence had become a voice, one that resonated with strangers across the world. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Daniel sat with his mother in the garden. She was knitting, the sun warming her shoulders, while Daniel read aloud some of the responses he had received. She smiled through tears, whispering, "He'd be proud of you." "You know," Daniel looked at the box resting on the table beside them. For the first time, he didn't feel the sting of loss. He felt gratitude. The box had been his father's final gift, not just of secrets, but of understanding. It had taught him that love endures beyond words, beyond silence, beyond death, as the sun dipped low. Painting the sky in shades of gold, Daniel whispered quietly to himself, "I hear you now, Dad, and I'll never forget." The box remained closed, its lock forever broken, its secrets forever revealed. But in its stillness, it held something more powerful than Mystery Ed held, a legacy of love. And Daniel knew he would carry that legacy for the rest of his life. If this story touched your heart, you are not alone. So many of us carry questions about our parents, about the people who raised us in silence, about the sacrifices that went unnoticed. Sometimes we only understand their love too late. And sometimes, like Daniel, we discover that what looked like distance was actually devotion in disguise. Maybe this story reminded you of your own father or mother. Maybe it brought back memories of small acts of love, a warm meal, a repaired roof, a long day's work that didn't look like much at the time, but meant everything in the end. If it did, hold on to that feeling, share it. Because these quiet truths are what connect us as human beings. At Real Moments, we believe stories like this have the power to heal. They remind us to look closer, to forgive faster, to love deeper while we still have the chance. That's why we share them with you, not just to entertain, but to inspire reflection and gratitude. So if this story resonated with you, I invite you to take a moment right now. Like this video so more people can find it. Share it with someone you love, a sibling, a friend, or maybe even a parent you haven't spoken to in a while. You never know whose heart it might reach or whose perspective it might change. And if you want to hear more true, powerful, and meaningful stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Real Moments. Every week, we bring you stories that are raw, emotional, and deeply human. Stories that might just remind you of your own life or help you see the lives of others in a new way. Your support means more than you know. Every like, every comment, every share helps this community grow in together. We can keep spreading messages of love, forgiveness, and hope to people all around the world. So thank you for being here, for listening, and for opening your heart. Until next time, remember, sometimes the quietest moments hold the loudest truths.